Hey everyone, this is Kevin from the chesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be going over one of my favorite traps. It's the Bobby Fischer trap. Bobby Fischer, probably one of my favorite players of all time to study, has so much to teach us, has taught me so much, not personally, but as far as his games and his technique and his strategies that he used on the chessboard. Has really made me the chess player that I am today. So hopefully you guys enjoy this trap as much as I do. Starts out with pawn to e4. Yes, Bobby Fischer was not opposed to opening the game up. Nowadays, you typically just see pawn to d4. Players are a little more boring these days, in my opinion. Back in the day, Bobby Fischer didn't mind mixing it up. But pawn to e4, and then black played pawn to c5. Obviously, this is the Sicilian defense, probably one of the best scoring defenses that black can play here. White's going to continue with knight to f3. Simple development move, trying to control the center with his minor pieces. Typically, you want to bring your knights out before bishops. Obviously, that's exactly what Bobby Fischer does. Then black's going to play knight to c6. Again, simple development move. At the same time, this is the accelerated dragon. For anyone that's too familiar with all the different variations of the Sicilian, this is getting ready for the accelerated dragon. From here, Bobby Fischer plays d4. Typical, both the pawns are going to exchange off the board, and the knight captures on d4. Now from here, black continues with the accelerated dragon, and the pawn's going to come to g6. In the typical dragon, the pawn first comes to d6, and then later on it comes to d5. But in the accelerated dragon, the pawn first comes to g6, the bishop is fianchettoed on the king side, and then later on black will look to thrust forward with a pawn to d5, trying to save himself that extra move. So if anyone's sitting there not too familiar with the accelerated dragon, that's kind of the quick version of how it differs from the regular dragon in the Sicilian defense. But from here, white's going to play knight to c3. Again, simple development move, trying to control the center of the board. And black's going to play bishop to g7. Again, fianchettoing his bishop, getting ready to develop his other minor pieces, and get his king to safety. Play continues with bishop to e3. Again, simple development move from white here, getting his minor pieces involved into the game. Both the knights are out, so the bishops can start to come out as well. Now the knight's going to come out to f6 for black. Again, simple development move, at the same time getting ready to castle on the king side. From white, the bishop's now going to come to c4. Again, the light square bishop is a little bit more powerful at the beginning of the game because it can attack this f7 square, which is a huge weakness for black early on into the game. From here, black's going to castle on the king side. Again, king side safety is a huge factor early on into the game. And then Bobby Fischer plays bishop to b3. Now, if anyone's really studied Bobby Fischer a lot, Bobby Fischer absolutely loves this move. He really loves to bring his bishop to the b3 square and just eye down on this f7 square the entire game and just put tons and tons of pressure on his opponents. Personally, I've started to try to do this more and more and just find that it's really hard for your opponent. Anytime you can have more than one weakness for your opponent, it's really hard for them to kind of play against all those. And so Bobby Fischer just likes to hang out with his bishop on b3 and just completely eye down on this f7 square the entire game. So that's kind of what he does. This is a typical move. Nothing crazy, out of the ordinary, but at the same time, this sets up a trap. And the trap is simple. It's basically luring the knight on c6 to come to c5. And you'll see this a lot of times, especially the higher up you play, since most players do favor bishops, especially in this game. It is an open game right now. But early on in the game, you typically favor bishops over knights. And so a lot of times you'll see the knight come to a5 because he's really black's looking to trade off pieces here. He's looking to trade off this light square bishop from white for his dark square bishop, or excuse me, his dark square knight here on a5. But Bobby Fischer has different plans, and the trap is already set up after the knight comes to a5. He kind of just sets himself in this trap. The pawn's going to come to e5, and it attacks this knight here on f6, and there's really no good place for the knight to come. The best move would actually be if the knight comes and captures on b3, then the exchange could look something like this. The pawn's going to take here on f6, the knight can come down and capture on a1. Again, we're just taking as much material as possible. The pawn's now going to come to g7. The knight is already trapped, so he may as well take as much material as he can. He takes on c2, the pawn, and then the knight captured, and the pawn is captured. Now keep in mind, white probably has a better game in this situation. it's kind of tough to tell, but as far as development, obviously he's dominating black in this regard. The dark square bishops, or excuse me, the light square bishop for black's not doing anything. All the pawns pretty much not moved, and white pretty much has all his pieces developed. So he does have a little advantage here, but it's very hard for black to play this in this position. Even if he does, it's still going to be good for white, but instead he really has to find a square for his knight. So let's look at his options. Obviously, if he brings his knight to h5, this is probably one of the most passive squares on the board. Knights on the A and the H file typically is not where you want to put them. If you've ever heard the saying, knights on the rim are dim, that's kind of really not what you want here. At the same time, if white really wanted to, he could bring his pawn here to g4, and he's pretty much going to win this knight here. Obviously, this knight cannot come to g4. The queen is attacking it here from d1. At the same time, if he brings it to d5, it is going to be captured right away by this knight here on c3. So, logical move is to bring the knight back to e8. You'll see this a lot of times in a lot of different openings from black. Obviously, once you bring your knight out, you castle on the king side, and then you go ahead and bring your knight back to e8. Again, a lot of times black in these scenarios, as far as the accelerated dragon and the dragon, you like to kind of stay back and then attack later on, kind of see what your opponent's going to do. But as we can see here, e8 is actually going to be a very big mistake here, because white has a nice little sacrifice with bishop to f7. And this is just devastating for black for a couple reasons. First of all, let's say he captures with his king here, which probably is the worst move, but at the same time, I mean, there's really no great move. From here, white can play knight to e6, and this is a devastating move because this queen here on d8 is going to be captured. Obviously, we can already see now why this trap is so good. At the same time, not only is this queen going to be captured, but this king is no longer defended. He no longer has this pawn here on f7. Anytime your king is fianchettoed with the bishop here on g7, if you lose a pawn, it just becomes that much weaker. So anytime you're fianchettoing your bishop, you always want to make sure that you have all your pawns. In this case, since he's already lost one pawn and his king's out, that's just not safe at all. So in this case, as we can see, even if he does capture right here, then the queen can come in and capture on d8. Now also keep in mind, he could capture with his rook, which is probably the best move if he does have an option here, because again, he doesn't really want to expose his king if he doesn't have to right away. But from here, the same thing. The knight can come to e6. This queen here is going to be lost. As we can see, he can't come to c7, he'll be captured by the knight, and he can't come to b6, he'll be captured by the bishop. Best move really, he can come to c7 if he wants to, and then after the knight captures, then the knight can recapture here, and white's going to be up a ton of material. But again, there's really no good moves because he has fallen into a trap. So always keep this in mind. It looks like it's a good idea to kind of bring this knight back to e8, but it's actually not. After he brings the knight back to, after he brings his knight back to e8, then white can simply come in, sacrifice his bishop on f7, which again, this f7 square is a huge weakness for black early on. And after either of these takes, the rook or the king, then the knight's just going to come here to e6. Just a devastating move right here. As you can really see, there's a problem with all these pawns, none of them being moved up, and at the same time, all of these pieces on the back range. Just kind of minimizing all the different squares that all these pieces can come to, especially the queen in this case. So this is the Bobby Fischer attack. He used it over and over again. It's pretty sad that people kept falling for it. I've used it a few times. It's awesome. The great thing about it is, even if they don't fall for it, even if they don't bring their knight to a5, you still have a fantastic game. Anytime you can set your opening up, your board up like Bobby Fischer does, you're pretty much going to give yourself a good opportunity to win the game. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.